In this video, I'm going to show you guys how I tune a snare drum from this sound to this sound. Of course, I'm only doing this video because it is somewhat highly requested among you guys. And in return, all I ask is for you guys to turn that like button blue and hit that subscribe button. First, we're going to use this big giant drum key. We're going to use this Phallum 2 snare side drum head. And finally, we're going to use the White Max snare drum head. For step 1, you're going to unscrew the lugs and then you're going to remove the drum head. Now usually, I like to evenly remove the drum head, and that is to unscrew the lugs that are on the opposite side of each other. If you try to unscrew the lugs in a circle, there's a chance that the lugs will get harder and harder to unscrew, and it might just make the whole process longer. So that's why I unscrew the lugs the way that I do. When you're finished, you can go ahead and take off the rim with the drum head and put the rim to the side, and then with your old drum head, you can proceed on to using it as a frisbee. Now perhaps I should have probably removed the bottom drum head first instead of the top, but it doesn't really matter, whichever one you want to do first should be okay. Before removing the bottom snare side head, first you got to take off the snares. And by doing that, you're going to untwist it from the gut, and then you're going to proceed to slide the snares out of the guts. With the next step, you can then proceed to remove the drum head from the snare drum. You're going to do it the same way that you did with the top of the snare drum by unscrewing the lugs opposite of each other. That way it'll make it easier to remove the lugs from the snare drum. When you're finished with unscrewing the lugs, you can then proceed to removing the bottom snare drum rim and put it off to the side. And then with the bottom mylar head, you can proceed to use it as a frisbee. Next, you're going to go ahead and bring out your Phallum 2 snare side head. Go ahead and put the head on top of the drum shell. Next, you're going to get the bottom snare drum rim and put it over the top of the snare drum head. Next, you're going to want to make sure that the lugs are evenly placed on top of the rods which surrounds the shell. And then finally, you're going to go ahead and screw in the lugs. Now right here at this point, I'm not screwing in the lugs completely, as in I'm not tightening it all the way, because I want to make sure that they are evenly going inside the rods. That way I'm not unevenly tightening up the drum head. Otherwise, you could tear the drum head, or it could come out really lopsided and the sound could really be altered. So right now I'm just screwing in the really loose lugs until they pretty much lock. And then after that, without tightening the lugs, I go in a circle to make sure that they are all evenly locked in. And if there's a loose lug, I will screw it in until it locks. After that, the next step is to start cranking up your drum head. And at this point, I use the cross tuning method, which is basically to tighten each lug on the opposite side of each other. Some people might call it the star method. And basically, I have 3 categories of tightening the lug. In category 1, if the lug is somewhat tight, I only twist it 1 time. In the second category, if the lug is somewhat loose, I twist the drum key 2 times. And in the third category, if the lug is really loose, I will twist the drum key 3 times. And in a lot of cases, I do tend to forget which lug I've already tightened. So to counter that, I twist the key very softly to see if the lug is loose. If it's not loose, I leave it alone. And if it's loose, I twist the key according to one of the categories. After the first round of tuning, I use the circle method to make sure that all the lugs are nice and firmly tight, and to make sure that nothing is loose and lopsided. Once completed, you can then proceed to slide your snares back into the guts, and tighten the snares accordingly. In my case, I tighten the snares until they lock at a certain point, and I make sure that the snares are evenly touching the bottom head. I want to cut to this quick scene to show you guys a close-up of a snare drum shell. Usually on the bottom of the snare drum shells, there's going to be a slight ridge. But if you were to rub your fingers on it, you would definitely notice the ridge. If your snares are not touching the bottom of the drum head, it means that you have to rotate the actual snare drum shell. Usually there's going to be some holes aligned with where the ridge is. You got to make sure that the ridge of the snare drum shell is aligned perfectly with the snare drum guts and with the bottom snare drum rim, so that you don't lose the snare drum sound. Once you take care of that, you can then go ahead and proceed with another round of tuning. And you're pretty much going to repeat the same tuning process as you would the first time you did it. Once you finish tuning the bottom head and you do your little final checks and preps to make sure it's all good and clear to go ahead and flip your drum over. Next, we're going to pull out the White Max snare drum head. Proceed to put the snare drum head onto the shell and go ahead and put the rim over the top of it. Make sure the lugs are evenly placed on top of the rods. Just like with the bottom head, I'm not going to screw the rods all the way in. I'm just going to screw them in until they lock. Just like with the bottom head, I'm going to make sure that the lugs are all locked in place by using the circle method. Next, you can proceed with tuning your snare drum head. I'm using the same exact methods as I was using when I was tuning the bottom snare drum heads, and that's by tuning the snare drums according to the categories that I mentioned earlier in the video. Once again, I'm using the circle method to make sure that all the lugs are locked in place, and also making sure that there isn't any loose lugs. So it's starting to sound like something, but it could sound a lot better. Therefore, we're going to go through one more round of tuning. The whole process is going to be the same exact way that I did it the first time. I'm going to use the star method to tighten the lugs according to the categories. And then I'm going to use the circle method to make sure that all the lugs are tight and locked in, making sure that there isn't any loose lugs. As you can hear, the snare drum sounds beautiful, but I'm going to do a little bit more tuning to the snare drum because I want to maximize the sound that it can provide. So once again, just repeat the whole entire process, but this time you probably don't need to twist it 2 or 3 times, maybe 1 at maximum. But if you want to ignore my advice, then go ahead and do so. Just know that it's all your fault if the snare drum head tears, because I already warned you. Once again, make sure you turn that like button blue and hit the subscribe button. Subscribe! What are you waiting for? Subscribe! Other than that, have a nice day. Peace.